But what we could potentially try to do is use this Aorus Gen 4 add-in card adapter, which will allow me to put the NVMe SSD on this board, connect it to the PCI Express, connect the PCI Express to the M.2, and see if that works at all. Yeah, boy. This is a video that I've actually been wanting to do ever since it was announced that Sony was going to finally let us start putting SSDs into the PlayStation 5. In fact, I already did a video trying to do it well before it was ever even possible back when it first launched. But I ran into a few snags making this video. Number one, even though I applied for Sony's beta program, they didn't let me in. Let me in. Let me in. So I had to reapply, and then I finally got in last week on Thursday, which means I could start actually making this video. But then, in case you didn't see the video I released earlier this week, my son was in the hospital while my power went out, and then my internet went out. So I am now here late, delayed, after everybody else, but we're going to be taking a look at the PlayStation 5, seeing how we can install external SSDs now that I'm finally here and ready to do it. And in fact, we're going to be trying a few different ones because Sony only rates you for the high-end bad boys, but I want to see what happens when you slap in a piece of crap. So we're going to do that after we talk about today's video sponsor. Big thanks to Skillshare for sponsoring today's UFD Tech video. In case you haven't heard of them, Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of inspiring classes for creative and curious people. You can explore new skills, deepen existing passions, or just get lost in creativity. Whether it be optimizing productivity, creative writing, entrepreneurship, or graphic design, Skillshare likely has a class that can help you grow in whatever personal creative endeavor or career development you want to embark upon. Personally, I've been enjoying this class by Greg McEwen, Simple Productivity, How to Accomplish More with Less. Honestly, this class has been so helpful for me. I'm taking it again because I've just had to overhaul everything in my life with just everything that's complicated behind the back end, trying to figure out what do I want to prioritize in my life, what exactly needs to be isolated in order for me to be effective as a father, as a business owner, as a boss. It's just been incredible for this channel to survive. And thankfully, Skillshare is curated specifically for learning, meaning there's no ads, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow wherever your creativity takes you. No matter what 2021 brings, you can spend it creating something meaningful with Skillshare's online classes because time is what we make of it, my friends. And when you join, you can try one of Skillshare's new live classes, experience real-time inspiration as you connect with popular teachers while watching and working along with other members and just fostering a sense of community. And the first 1,000 of my subscribers, our community, click the link in the description, will get a 1-month free trial of Skillshare so you can start exploring your creativity today. Big thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring today's UFD Tech video. So to give you a preview of what we're going to be doing in this is I have 4 different SSDs that I want to test against the internal storage on the PlayStation 5 to see what loading times are like to the menu and then what loading times are like from the menu into the game, see if there's any difference with that, as well as maybe transfer speeds of transferring from the internal SSD to the additional one that's there. So the ones that I have are the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus. This was sent over by Sabrent. This meets all of Sony's specifications for the M.2 SSD. They want it to be a 2280 SSD, which is just the size. It needs to be PCI Express 4.0 with 4 lanes, and then it needs to be over 5,500 megabytes per second read and write speeds, which the Rocket 4 Plus absolutely falls into. Now, there are a few things, such as the fact that Sony is recommending that you don't use devices that have HMB instead of DRAM, because HMB, which stands for host memory buffer, could actually load slower than ones that have DRAM cache on the SSD. The 980 Pro, which is going to be our second one, doesn't suffer from this. We're going to be absolutely fine with that. And neither will be the experiment of the PCI Express 3.0 drive, which is this 970 Evo Plus. This has DRAM. It's probably the best PCI Express 3.0 drive that you can get on the market, and it costs $160, so it's actually pretty pricey. But we're also going to take a look at this kind of crappy lower end one, see if it even works for us to get PCI Express 3.0 working in the first place, and then what happens when we use a PCI Express 3.0 HMB SSD. So this doesn't have VRAM, it has HMB instead. This is probably the worst SSD that you can install in your PlayStation 5. So we're gonna go ahead and check it out and see what happens with all of that. Additionally, we're also going to be checking out Sabrent's Heatsink to see if that makes any difference on the Rocket 4 Plus, if that changes times or anything like that. So first up, we need to go into my PlayStation settings and actually update the software. It took a while for, again, Sony to let me into the beta program, but I'm now there. So you just go into System Software, then you go to System Software Update and Settings, and then bam, Update System Software Beta. Sitting right there, we're gonna be able to go ahead and get that taken care of. And there's all the details about installing that SSD into the PlayStation 5. That's mostly what I care about. There are a few other improvements, such as things with 3D audio, as well as just UI tweaks that are happening, but SSD, most important one here. So before we begin actually taking off the side panels and starting to install the drives and check all that, we need to check the stock speeds of the PlayStation 5 now that it's going to be on the same software as the other drive. So I want to test a few games. I don't really want to go too crazy checking out everything, so I think I have 3 games that I really want to try out. We've got Returnal, which is a PS5 exclusive. We've got Spider-Man Miles Morales with that PlayStation 5 update, and then a PS4 game on the PS5, which is going to be The Last of Us Remastered. So as mentioned, we're going to check out times of things like loading into the menu as well as loading into the game and seeing how quickly that can all get done. And then at the end, we'll compare the final numbers. I'm not going to record every single thing that I'm doing here. I'll keep you updated as things progress.
A few moments later.
Okay, so I got all of the preliminary numbers. Everything looks good. The PS5 is as fast as I expected. So now it's time to go ahead and shut down the device and get the first SSD installed, which we're going to start off with the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus and see how it goes. I'll walk you through exactly how to get the SSD installed just in case you're curious. All right, so take the PlayStation off of the stand or whatever you have. Now, it does seem like all of the indications online are that if you have the disc edition, you take off the panel that has the disc on it. I think on the digital edition, it's the side that doesn't have the PlayStation logo. So you're gonna peel up the tabs from the corners and then slide it down, and then yes, there it is. That's where you install the SSD right there. Probably want to unplug the power just so that you're not gonna short anything out, and it's as simple as having a Phillips head screwdriver. There's gonna be 2 screws that we have to go through, but this first one, which has the cover right on top of it, we're gonna pop that baby off and then we're good to go. Then you'll see down here is another screw, which we need to take out because that's gonna help us install the actual SSD. So the screw comes out, and then there's this little holder right here. This is the requirement for actually holding it in any one of these little slots. Now, the vast majority of SSDs that you're going to be putting into this slot are gonna be of the 2280 variety, which is just the typical M.2 size. So you take this little ring, you put it in the 80 section because that's what's gonna keep it there. You install it like a normal M.2 SSD, which is slightly at an angle first. You pop it in, make sure it's secure. You foist it down just a little bit, get that screw in there nice and snug, screw it down to make sure that it's stable, and then there you go, it's completely installed. Now, this is a pretty painless process. It is a bit less user-friendly than obviously Xbox's external expansion card, which just slides into the back of your console, but this honestly isn't the worst way they could have gone about it. The fact that it's easily accessible as soon as you pop off the plastic covers is a nice little touch. And just to get it back on, you align these little knobs, turn it over, get it in there, and just nice. You hear it pops right back in. So that's essentially all it takes in order to get the SSD physically installed. Now let's go ahead and take a look what it looks like software-wise to get everything up and running. And there we go. On initial boot up, it says that there's M.2 SSD that needs to be formatted, which is totally fine. That makes complete sense because it's being freshly installed and they probably have their own proprietary file format system. That took a few seconds. My read speed on this SSD are 6,558 megabytes per second as they quote it. Let's see what happens with everything moving forward. So in order to change where the games are installed, it shows you right there, settings, storage, installation location, but we're just gonna copy the games that I currently have on the internal storage and switch it over to that M.2. You can see that it has the name of my SSD right here, the Sabrent Rocket 4.0 Plus, and that it's 1 terabyte in storage. Out of all the games that I currently have installed on my PS5, I'm actually quickly running out of space. I have 220 gigabytes left, and having this external updated storage would be great. One of the neat things that you could possibly do, which we might get into experimental territory when we install the PCI Express 3.0 drive, is having the PS4 games loaded onto a slower drive that's on the M.2, and the PS5s are loaded into the actual console storage. And then to actually move the games, it's actually remarkably simple. You hit the options button or whatever that hamburger is now called, you go down to move games and apps, and then it'll allow you to select the games that you want to move. So in this case, we're going to be moving The Last of Us, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Returnal. To get those, we're going to move that over onto the M.2 SSD. It's going to be 133.9 gigabytes, and we're going to see how long this takes. Honestly, I'm impressed. That was remarkably quick. To get 133 gigabytes of games transferred, it was just over 2 minutes. After I'm done testing out all of these SSDs, I'll give the final comparison numbers at the end, but for now, I'm gonna get back into testing all of the load times on these games and see how quickly we can get this all done, and I'll let you know when we're moving on to the other SSDs.
More moments later.
So testing on those 3 games is done. Now the thing I actually wanna see is how long is it gonna take to move those games back to the actual internal storage. So that's what we're going for now. I wonder if the read and write speeds of the SSDs are going to be similar, and it's just more good data to have. And start. Holy crap, that took way longer to transfer games from the new M.2 SSD back to the regular console storage. Transferring it from the console storage to the M.2 SSD took 2 minutes and 10 seconds. Going the opposite way took 9 minutes and 43 seconds. So I'm curious for a couple things. Are the write speeds on the console storage slower, or potentially number 2, did our SSD overheat because it doesn't have a heatsink on it, in which case we can check that out later on in the video when I install the Rocket heatsink that came with the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus drive. So wow, I was not expecting it to be that long going the other way. So we're gonna turn off the PlayStation 5, and now we're gonna move on to the next SSD, the Samsung 980 Pro. I'm gonna do everything that I did with the other ones. Then we're gonna move on to the PCI Express 3.0 drives. I'm just gonna do the 980 Pro off camera. I'll come back to you when I install 3.0 drive, because I'm actually really curious to see what the PlayStation's gonna do when I install this bad boy. So let's get to it.
5 minutes later.
One thing to note before I start benchmarking on the 980 Pro, just got it installed. It's showing me that my read speed is about 1,000 megabytes per second less than it was on the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus drive. So that might come into consideration once I actually start benchmarking the games, but I just wanted to record that little bit of data so it's relevant later on. Okay, the 980 Pro is complete. I have just installed the first PCI Express 3.0 drive that's going to be going into the PS5, the 970 Evo Plus. Again, this is likely the highest end PCI Express 3.0 drive that you can use, and upon booting, there it is. Can't use the M.2 SSD inserted into the expansion slot. Use an M.2 SSD that meets these requirements. There you go. You can't actually use it. Confirm and turn off the PS5. That's happening, but do not fear. I have an optional thing that we can try. It likely will not work, but let me go ahead and go pick that up. Okay, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I've been waiting to install an M.2 SSD into my PS5 ever since it came out. So I had like crazy thoughts before about like, what are the limits that we could potentially push it to? And I forgot I had this around just until I was filming this video, and it's an M.2 to PCI Express adapter. Now this likely is not Gen 4. If I had to guess, this is probably Gen 3, if not less than that. I am not expecting this to work in the slightest, but what we could potentially try to do is use this Aorus Gen 4 add-in card adapter, which will allow me to put the NVMe SSD on this board, connect it to the PCI Express, connect the PCI Express to the M.2, and see if that works at all. So here is the card. We're gonna put SSDs on here and just see if it works at all. My guess is not. So let's start off easy by putting in a PCI Express 4 SSD just to see if the concept works at all. And if not, we can call it a day, say, hey, listen, you have to do PCI Express 4.0 or nothing. But if this works, I'm gonna be flabbergasted, I will say that. So my guess is this isn't gonna work at all. So I'm just gonna install one SSD here at the top. We're gonna plug in the card. I'm not gonna close everything up. It just doesn't make any sense for me to put the cover back on or try to get that to work, because it's too much effort for something that's likely going to fail quite immediately. So let's take that NVMe 3.0 drive out of this console and get this add-in card added in and see what happens. Okay, I'll have to be very careful because the ribbon cable might get just put in an awkward position. The M.2 section has been added into the PS5. Let's go ahead and see if this works, if it boots on, what exactly is going on here. PS5's turned on. This fan's not spinning, so that doesn't bode well. However, there is a 4-pin fan header right here, which maybe we need for power. I'm not sure. Okay, it booted, but it didn't do anything. So my guess is it did not detect the M.2 SSD that's in here. Yeah, and as I look in here, there is no M.2 SSD listed, so this is gonna be a flop. The only thing I can think is maybe I should move this M.2 drive over to this slot right here, and maybe that'll change things, but considering the fact that the fan isn't spinning up, it didn't detect anything in the PlayStation firmware, my guess is that it's not registering this device in the slightest. All right, let's try to boot this up one more time. Does it work? Moment of silence, drum roll, whatever we do to build anticipation around here. PlayStation logo, jazz hands. No M.2 device registered. It's not happening, friends. I'm gonna 100% confirm by going into the storage information. And yeah, it's not showing up there. Bummer. So it's 100% confirmed that you actually need to use a PCI Express 4.0 device in order to get it to work with your PS5. But there's one more thing that I want to confirm before I compare the numbers of the 980 Pro versus the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus, and that is install a little bit of RGB. This is a stupid device that I picked up on Amazon last year. It's simply an M.2 stick that you install, and then it has RGB lights. That's the whole shtick. I'm curious, number one, will it light up? And then number two, will the PlayStation throw up errors for it being installed at all? And if it doesn't, well then, I've got some RGB added to my PS5. Go ahead and boot it up. Does the light come on? I'm not seeing any lights. There it is. Oh, we got it. You see that? Oh, look at that. Look at that beautiful light right there. Green? Yeah. Oh, blue? Let's do it. RGB added to the PS5 and no error messages on the screen, which means since I actually do need to use these drives for another video, I'm keeping the RGB in here. I have successfully added, probably the only person to do so, added RGB to my M.2 slot, which means that my console storage, the internal storage, is gonna be about 85 times faster than everybody else's. Speaking of things being faster, let's go ahead and take a look at the comparison speeds of the SSDs and what we've got going on there. So between the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus and the 980 Pro from Samsung, the Samsung was faster in by very few amounts in most of the games that I tested here, and they were all very close to what the stock SSD speeds are on the PS5. So for loading times in Returnal, the stock loading time on the PS5 was 23.23 seconds, whereas the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus was 19.45, and the 980 Pro was 18.69. So the 980 Pro winning that matchup there. Spider-Man Miles Morales on stock to get to the menu was 35.91 seconds. On the Sabrent SSD, it was 34.69, and then on the 980 Pro, it was 34.61. So slight differences, likely not going to actually fully recognize them while you're playing games. From the menu to actually loading into the game, on stock SSD it was 5.39 seconds, on the Sabrent it was 5.17, and then on the 980 Pro it was 5.1. Again, these margins are so slim that you are likely not going to notice an end user difference in the slightest, so I wouldn't necessarily worry about that at all. Then lastly, we're looking at a PS4 game that's loaded onto the PS5, The Last of Us Remastered. Loading times to the menu on stock was 34.12, on the Sabrent it was 35.55, and on the 980 Pro it was 35.62. So the Samsung being the slowest on that one, but not when it comes to loading from the menu into the game. Stock time was 10.79 seconds, Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus was 11.03, and then the 980 Pro was 10.77. And then looking at how long it took to transfer the games from the internal SSD over to the M.2 and then again back from the M.2 to the internal. The Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus transferred the games from the internal to itself in 130.75 seconds, whereas the 980 Pro did it in 105.74. Getting from the M.2 back to the internal though took a really long time on both. It was 583 seconds, just shy of 6 minutes on the Sabrent, and then it was 584.5 seconds, so about a second longer on the 980 Pro, both taking a really long time to do. Now, I did mention that I thought that that could potentially be due to some heat transfer stuff, so now I'm going to see if we can reduce that by adding in this heatsink. And I will note that Sony does have limitations on how big the heatsink can be. I think we're over that with the Sabrent one, but I'll get it to work regardless, and we can see if we can reduce that 10-minute transfer time. So as expected, that SSD heatsink is sticking out quite a bit. There is no way that I'm gonna get that cover back on. I wonder if the plastic cover is gonna fit over it. Kinda, sorta. I can, like, yeah, it's a little floppy right here, as you can see. It, like, not 100%, but it technically, I mean, if it fits, it sits, right? So let's go ahead and check it out. Oh man, that is precarious. I'll get back to you with the numbers, my friends.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
All right, I just finished up the testing with the M.2 heatsink, and it didn't make a lick of difference whatsoever. We got 12-second faster transfer speeds going from internal to the M.2, but going back from the M.2 to the regular internal storage was the slowest. It was 1 second slower than all of the other times I did it, which tells me that the bottleneck is not happening on the SSD. Cooling off the Rocket 4 Plus made absolutely no difference when it came to adjusting the loading times for getting the games off of the SSD onto the internal. So I'm just gonna say that that's a bottleneck with Sony's internal storage somehow. I'm not exactly sure why or what's going on there, but it definitely isn't with the SSD, because it should have at least seen some sort of performance difference with that heatsink being installed. So now I'm just reloading in my RGB M.2 drive. I'm not gonna be able to see it because I'm gonna cover it up, but at least I'll always know it's there, and it's a good place to store it, because ever since I purchased it, it's just been sitting in a drawer anyways, because who needs something that's just purely an aesthetic RGB M.2 take up spacer? Not this guy. So if I had to choose between the two SSDs that I've tested out today, I would go with either one. They're actually nearly identical when it comes to the functional experience that you're getting. Obviously, swapping out the M.2 on the SSD of the PS5 is a little harder than adding the external storage to the Xbox, but the Xbox is again a bit more locked down. I was able to test multiple options here with Sony, whereas with the Xbox, I have to just purchase whatever Seagate is selling. If Microsoft wants to open it up at some point, that would be great. But the PS5 seems to have points in enthusiast friendliness, where installing an M.2 is not a big deal for a lot of enthusiasts, whereas Microsoft seems to be targeting the general consumer, which I think is probably going to be a better long-term approach for them. But what do you think of the PS5? Its external SSDs. Are you bummed that something like this giant adding card didn't work? I want to hear from you down below in the comments. And in case you're wondering how I got a PS5, you should check out the video where we got one on launch day, because I had to trade a $2,000 gaming setup in order to get it. And I'll see you in the next UFD Tech video, my friends. Cheers.